Well, good morning, everybody. How's everybody feeling today? Good? All right. We got some people right here that are alive. The rest of you, we got time. You can wake up. It's all good. But hey, before we get started this morning, I just felt like I wanted to apologize if I seem at all uncomfortable or awkward up here. I just wanted you to know it's not because I'm nervous or anything like that, but it's actually because, it's because I was homeschooled. And so we're talking about confessions of a pastor, and so I'm kind of, just being honest, I'm sort of permanently uncomfortable now because of that. So there's that. Just want to give you fair warning. And it's funny because a lot of times I don't even have to tell people I was homeschooled. Like, they just sort of know somehow. I don't know how they know. Like, because you have to understand, like, when like, I'm in a conversation with somebody and it kind of comes up and I was like, oh yeah, I was homeschooled, my whole life. And they were like, oh, we knew. And I'm like, you did? And he's like, we've probably known longer than you have. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Because, the goal, I think, when you tell someone that you're homeschooled, right? Like, the goal is you want that other person to be surprised, right? Like you don't want them to you don't want them to look back and be like, that totally makes sense, right? Like, that's not a win for anyone. You want them to look at you and be like, really? Like, what? But that's just not really been my experience. I don't know why. I don't know what's up with that. But, it's funny because, I think as homeschoolers, we're not exactly known for being socially adept, you could say. And so I get this. I've just decided that I'm just going to kind of lean into this now, okay? Like, I've come to terms with it. I get it. I'm a little bit weird. And so now I just decided I'm just going to blame everything on being homeschooled, like just everything across the board. So like Dan, he'll be like, hey man, I noticed that your report that you sent me, it had a couple typos in it. And I'm just like, ooh, yeah, actually, I'm really sorry about that, but I was homeschooled, like, what did you expect, Or he's like, hey man, like, I noticed you've been coming in late to work. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I was homeschooled though, I'm used to being at home a lot. So I just sort of do that. But I'm just joking, if you're in the room and you're homeschooled and you're really mad at me, I'm sorry. Please don't write me any letters. I actually love being homeschooled. No, really, I did. I had a great time. I love homeschoolers. There's a lot of advantages to being homeschooled. In fact, I don't know about you, but how many people in the room, how many of you guys graduated valedictorian of your class, right? Where's my valedictorians at? Anybody? This guy, number one in my class, baby. Back up. 1 out of 1, but it still counts. Okay, I'm just saying. Not only that, I was also voted prom king. Is there any prom kings out there? That's what I thought. I didn't think so. I got voted prom king. Granted, it was a little weird having to dance with my sister in the living room, but we won't talk about that. Totally worth it. I still have my crown. It's sitting at home next to my homeschool hand-me-down denim outfits that I used to wear, but we won't talk about any of that. But, if I seem a little bit uncomfortable or awkward, that's why. It's because I was homeschooled, so just give me a little grace. In fact, not only was I homeschooled, but I actually had like kind of the double whammy because not only I was homeschooled, but I'm also an introvert, okay? Is there any introverts out there, all right? That's exactly the response I thought I would see. No one's cheering for the introverts because, well, you're introverts, right? Like, it's like I was having lunch with this guy a couple weeks ago, and we're talking, and he's like, so you're an introvert. Like, tell me about that. And I'm just like, ooh, yeah, that's not really how this works. Because that would require me telling you things and would require talking and also people. Two things that I try to avoid. If you're in the room and you're an extrovert, I'm just going to go ahead and say, like, listen, you just don't know what it's like, okay? Life is just harder if you are an introvert. I'm just being honest. You think you don't know. You and I, we can go to the exact same party and have entirely different experiences. First of all, if you're an extrovert, for you, like most normal people, you get ready for a party. You get dressed, you do your thing, you get ready. I don't get ready for parties. As an introvert, I gather strength for a party. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I'm in the mirror giving myself like a pep talk, like, you got this, man. Like, you can do it. It's going to be awesome. I show up to the party. You guys show up to the party like most normal people. You show up and you walk in the door and you kind of look for your friends, right? Like, that's what most people do. They're kind of looking for people they know that they can hang out with. I walk into the party. I'm looking for exits. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like Jason Bourne. I'm counting windows that I can get through. I've got an exit 20 feet to the right. Like, if there's a vent that I could possibly fit in, if I need to make a quick escape, like that's, like if this whole pastor thing doesn't work out, I've really considered a career in the CIA because I've got a lot of training, right? I'm just saying, like, for me, when I'm at a party, like, the thing that I'm thinking about almost the entire time that I'm there is, what is the shortest amount of time that I can be here and it still be socially acceptable? Like, that's, because I don't want to be a jerk, you know, I don't want to be the first person to leave. Like, no one wants to be that guy. But you better believe, as soon as that first sacrificial lamb walks out that door, I'm like, I can't believe that person, but I just got a phone call, so I'm gonna have to go too, right? Because that's just the way that I am, right? And it's hard, okay? Because sometimes us introverts, you know, we miss social cues, we just do. And there's this one time that comes to mind. I was speaking at this youth group, actually in Indiana. And I got done kind of giving the message, and I'm in the lobby hanging out, and I'm talking to some of the kids. And I remember I got in this conversation with this one kid, and he's telling me about, you know, all these things that's going on in his life and how the message, he really needed to hear it. Like, it was this really, you know, kind of cool conversation. And he starts opening up and getting really personal. I'm like, this is awesome. And so we're kind of in the throes of this conversation when all of a sudden, this girl just walks up and just stops right next to me, just starts staring at me. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like this where you're clearly in a conversation and someone else like wants to talk and it's kind of awkward because you're like, I'm trying to have a conversation, and she's like not picking up the hints. But that's the moment that I was in. And so I'm trying to, you know, be nice. And so I kind of look over and I'm like, hey, you know, how's it going? And she looks back and she goes, good. Okay, I'll take that. So I'm like, okay, you don't have anything to say, so cool. So I kind of like turn my body, you know, to kind of like give her the hint that like this is the A-B conversation, you need to see your way out, like that whole thing, right? Like that's what I'm trying to like do. And meanwhile, we're having, like, he's starting to get real personal and tell me about some stuff that's going on in his life, and it's really good. And she's just sitting there and she's just staring at me, and it's so awkward. I'm like, what is she doing? Like, what is going on? And I'm trying to talk, and she's not picking up the hints or the social cues, and I'm like, I'm just gonna handle this, right? Famous last words, right? So I look over and I'm like, excuse me, like, do you need something? And she looks back and she says, nope. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just gonna be real honest, like we're trying to have a conversation here and you're just staring at me, and I'll just be real honest, it's really kind of weirding me out a little bit. To which she looks at me and replies, I'll never forget it. She looks back and she says, man, I'm so sorry. I'm blind. And I'm not kidding you. If you want to talk about feeling like the worst human on the planet, that was this guy, right? Like, I mean, it was the worst. I mean, there's no way you can recover from a moment like that. Like, I just wanted to go find the nearest bridge because I'm telling you, like, it was the worst. And I don't know how I missed it. Like, I don't know. Like, I just didn't notice, I guess. But again, I'm thankful that I was homeschooled because, again, you know, it's not my fault because I was homeschooled, so it's fine, you know, like, could be worse, right? So I'm just telling you, man, it's hard. It's hard sometimes when you're an introvert and you're home. I mean, you got the odds stacked against you. So today, as we continue our series, Confessions of a Pastor, now that you guys have got to know me a little bit, you probably won't be all that surprised by my confession, but I'm just going to go ahead and dive in because here's my confession. Sometimes I just don't really like people, okay? I'm just being honest. Sometimes I don't really like people that much. You know why? Because people are hard. People are confusing sometimes. You know what? People almost always complicate things. Like almost all the time, people complicate things. And when they really start to get to know you a little bit, like it usually gets messy and there's drama and it's inconvenient. I'm like, who has time for all this, right? I don't like people all that much. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I was sitting in a meeting with the city, and we were planning out like this community event, and we're kind of, you know, planning this whole event for the family, and we're going over logistics and how can we make this awesome event. And we're going around telling our ideas, and I'm thinking, I have an idea to make this a great event. let's just not invite the people and it'll be way better because the people are what makes this event so hard to do. It's the people ruin everything, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this before. It's just me. But that's how I feel sometimes. And you know, sometimes I don't really feel like spending time with people. You know, I don't really want to go to the party. I don't really want to go, like, hang out with a bunch of people. You know what I feel like doing almost all the time is just staying home and, like, watching ESPN by myself. Like, that is, like, a dream come true for me, you know? And I don't know if you've ever experienced this tension before, but for me, you know, I feel like I'm busy. You know, I've got a lot of stuff going on. My calendar, guess what? It's really full. And I get home from work and from the office, and I'm tired, and the last thing that I feel like doing most of the time is spending time with people, right? Like, it's just, that's not what I feel like doing. And listen, the irony is not lost on me that I work at a church. And so that creates some problems for me, because I don't know if you've gotten the memo or not, but ministry is all about people, right? And that creates a certain amount of tension in my life because there's this pressure. Because as a pastor, I'm supposed to love people and invest into people and encourage people and counsel people and pour my whole life out into people. But if I'm being honest, like, most of the time, I'd just kind of rather stay home. And of course, this is problematic because, you know, Jesus, figured we'd talk about him today since we're at church, but Jesus probably, like, the two biggest mandates that Jesus left us with, like the two things that he said, hey, if you miss everything else, don't forget these two things, were, you guessed it, all about people. In fact, they were so important that they called them the greats, right? You remember these? The Great Commandment. We got the Great Commandment and also the Great Commission, right? The Great Commandment to love God and to love people. The Great Commission to make disciples, in other words, to love people towards Jesus. Like these are sort of like the non-negotiables as it pertains to following Christ. Like, this is central to what it means to follow Jesus. And you sort of start to feel the gravity of that when, as a pastor, you look in the mirror and you're thinking, man, like, I'm just not that great at the Great Commandment or the Great Commission. Like, that's not good. Like, that's a problem. Like sometimes I just have a hard time loving people. And it's not that I hate people, not that I don't have any friends. In fact, you know, I'm friends with many of you in this room. But I think perhaps a more honest confession is this, is that I like people just at a distance. I like people as long as it's on my terms. I like people as long as it's doing what I want to do. And then, you know, I don't want to get too close, you know, because I don't want you to see all the stuff in my life, all the areas behind the scenes that I'm trying to figure out. Like, I don't want to get that close because that starts to get messy real fast. So I'm good, like, as long as you're good hanging out on my terms, then we're good. And see, I think God's been convicting me about this more and more lately. And the more that I think about this, and the more that I try to figure out, okay, where is this coming from? The more that I peel back those layers, the more I realize that this is much less connected to the fact that, you know, I was homeschooled or that I was an introvert or any of those things. And it's much more connected to something much, much more simple and yet also much, much more destructive. And it's this, is that it's just plain old-fashioned selfishness. Like, it's just selfishness. As I was writing this message, I kept trying to think of, like, a prettier way to say that. Like, oh, what's a cool way to, like, no, but at the end of the day, it's just good old-fashioned selfishness. Like, sometimes I'm just really, really selfish, and it's ugly. And so I've been thinking about this. And I came across this quote by a guy named Judah Smith, and he said this. He said, the opposite of love is not hate, but it's selfishness. And I thought, man, that's so true. Like, that story, it's not that I hate people, it's just I'm really selfish most of the time. And you see this traced all throughout the scriptures, all the way back at the very beginning. You see, man, people choosing self over love. We see that with Adam and Eve, right? They chose self over love. They chose self over God. We see it in the New Testament. Remember Peter, Jesus' disciple? He denied Christ famously or infamously 3 times, right? Remember, what did he do? He chose self-preservation. He chose what was convenient for him over Jesus. And we all do this all the time. We all have that same tendency to gravitate towards self, towards what's convenient for me. what's comfortable for me, what do I prefer. We gravitate towards self. And listen, at the end of the day, often the biggest casualty of our selfishness is our relationships. Because I don't know if you've experienced this, but relationships are inconvenient sometimes. Sometimes relationships require things of you. Sometimes, actually, almost always, when you want to talk about getting vulnerable and letting people in, almost all the time, that is uncomfortable. And so what most of us do is we gravitate towards self. We gravitate towards us. And we think, man, this is so uncomfortable, so I'm just not going to do that. And our tendency towards self will almost always pull us away from others. And this has huge implications, not just for our friendships, but for our spiritual lives. And the reason why is because relationships are to our spiritual health what oxygen is to our physical health. You got to think about this. Because our vertical relationship with our Heavenly Father is directly connected to our horizontal relationship. In other words, we need people in our lives if we're going to grow in our relationship with Jesus. We just do. We need others. We can't do it on our own. And I can make all the excuses I want about being busy, about being tired, about not wanting to really invest into my relationships. I can make excuses all day long, but at the end of the day, it's just plain old selfishness, and it's ugly, and it's hurting me. See, selfishness, it suffocates our spiritual growth. It just does. The more that we allow selfishness to lead our lives, the more that we are suffocating the very thing that God's trying to do in our lives, because we're isolating ourselves from people and in turn isolating ourselves from God. And so for me, as I've been thinking about this more and more, if I'm going to grow in my faith, if I'm going to be someone who truly looks like Jesus, if I'm going to be healthy and learn to love others like Jesus, I keep coming back to this question. It's the question that I want to spend the rest of our time looking at. What does it look like for me to open up my life to others? What does that look like? Because this is central to what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And so as someone who says, man, this is who I want to be, I've got to figure out what does it look like for me to open up my life to others. And as I was thinking about this, I came across this passage in the New Testament. It's written by a guy named Paul. And Paul's writing to the church in Philippi, and he's instructing them on how to grow in your faith and how to live in unity with others. And he speaks directly to this issue, and I love it because he just sort of dives right in Philippians chapter 2, and I want to share this verse. It says this. This is Paul writing. He says, hey, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Now, I want to pause here because this is so interesting because Paul is making a connection here that most of us just breeze right past. Paul is showing us the progression of our selfishness. He's showing us how our selfishness actually can create distance in our relationships, because here's what most of us do in the room if you are normal. And I am certainly in this category, not the normal part of it, but just selfish person, right? Most of us, we try to lead with impressing others, right? When we meet somebody, when we're hanging out with people, we want to impress others. We want to put our best foot forward. And most of us, that's where we lead in our relationships. We're just trying to impress others. We want people to see the good sides of us. We want people to see the sides of us that's going to make them think, wow, this is a really cool guy, right? This is, that's what we lead with in our relationships. And oftentimes, what ends up happening is we try to hide the rest. Right? We try to show people just the edited version of our lives because we don't want people to see our flaws. And in doing so, we actually begin to create this distance because we have this wall up of these parts of our lives that are off limits to others. And see, what this inevitably does is it creates distance in our relationship, and it causes us to not be able to connect with people because we're not being vulnerable. We're not opening up our lives at all. We're being selfish. And Paul looks at this and he calls this selfishness. He says, guys, you can't do that. That's self-serving. It's all about you. He's saying if you're going to open up your life to others, you've got to learn to lead with vulnerability. He's saying you've got to learn that it's not all about you, but you've got to lead with vulnerability. Because sure, people are impressed with our strengths. We all know that, but people connect with our weaknesses. And see, the very thing that you're afraid to do to let people see behind the scenes of your life, those broken parts of your life, is actually the thing that's going to be a catalyst to a genuine connection. And so Paul says, man, we've got to get this. This is why if you guys were here last week, I loved Kelly's message. It's because she modeled this for us. She got up on the stage and said, you know what? I'm not going to pretend to be perfect. I'm not going to pretend like I have it all together 100% of the time. I'm going to, instead of leading with trying to impress everyone, I'm going to lead with vulnerability and honesty. And it was amazing because she just started sharing about some of the insecurities in her life and some of the things she's processing. And as I was sitting in all 3 services, I looked around the room and I watched as what actually happened is we all started to lean in. And I saw a lot of people nodding and saying, yes, like I get that. I'm with you. I understand. Like me too. Right? And as she was just being open and vulnerable, I don't know about you, but it challenged me to say, man, I want to live more like that. I want to live more like Jesus lived. And see, I think that's what Paul's getting at in this passage. He's saying, man, this is at the essence of what it means to open up your life with others. You've got to learn to lead with vulnerability because that is central to a connection with other people. And so then he continues on in the next verse and he says this. He says, be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. He says, don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Now, what I love about this verse is it's just so obvious, right? Like if we just take 2 seconds to think about it, like, of course, like if we're going to open up our lives to others, like it can't just be all about us. Of course, we have to like take interest in other people. Like we all get this intuitively because it's so obvious. But yet Paul felt the need to write this and to include this in his letter. Why? Because though you and I all get this concept intuitively, and it's like, of course, yeah, this is so obvious, I get it. Very few of us actually do this in real life. Do you know what most of us are interested in most of the time? Me. Not me, but you guys clearly aren't interested in me right now, but me, right? We're interested in ourselves. We're interested in the things that we want to do that's convenient to us. And Paul says, no. If you want to open up your life to others, you've got to learn we must consider others first. We've got to learn to consider others first. He's saying this is the way of Jesus. And for me, when I consider me first, you know where that leads me almost 100% of the time? It leads me to sitting home, watching ESPN by myself almost all the time because that's just the reality because I'm selfish. And Paul says, no. That's not the way of Jesus. You've got to learn to prioritize others. You've got to learn to consider others first. This is the way of Jesus. And as someone who struggles to do this, can I just be real honest? It's really hard sometimes. And the reason why it's so hard is because inevitably when we open up our lives to others, it costs us something. It's a challenge, right? You see, when you open up your life to others, it will inevitably intersect with your schedule, your budget, and your convenience. It just will. And those are all 3 things that, if I'm being honest, I hold really dear. I try to keep all those close to my chest, right? Because I don't like when things intersect with my schedule and my budget and my convenience. Like, those are things that, like, man, I want to hang on to. But yet Paul says this is what it means to open up your life like Jesus. This is what it means. It means, you know what? Sometimes it's going to cost you. Sometimes it's going to be inconvenient. Sometimes it's going to hit your pocketbook, right? Sometimes it's going to intersect with your schedule. But this is the substance of real relationships. You know what that looks like in real life? It looks like, you know, when your buddy calls you up and he says, hey, man, we're moving this weekend. Would you be able to come help me move? It's the phone call that all of us dread receiving, right? Like no one wants to help anyone move because it's the worst. But you know what? Someone who says, you know what, I'm going to open up my life to others, you know what they do? They do it. It intersects with their convenience. It's hard. They don't feel like it, but they say, you know what? I value this relationship. I'm going to consider others first. It looks like when your neighbor is sick or your neighbor maybe is, you know, had a baby recently or something, you bring them a meal because that's what love looks like. It considers others first. It says, you know what? It's not all about me. Yeah, this is kind of inconvenient. Yeah, it's costing money, but it's not all about me. I'm going to consider you first. So Paul says, if you're going to open up your life, you've got to be willing to lead with vulnerability. You've got to be able to consider others first. And then he wraps up his thought in this verse 5. He says this, you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. And I love this because he says, hey guys, this isn't complicated. Let me just boil it down to this. You want to know what it looks like to open up your life? Just look at what Jesus did and then just do that. You know? Like just look at Jesus' life and then model your life after him. And what did Jesus do? Man, he opened up his life to people. to people that were different than him, to people who betrayed him. He opened up his life to the poor. He opened up his life to kids. He opened up his life to strangers, to friends. Like he said, man, I'm going to make space for others, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's difficult, even when it's challenging, even when it's uncomfortable and it costs me something. I'm going to open up my life. Why? Because I understand that I love my Heavenly Father best when I'm loving his kids. And so for us, if we are going to live the way that Jesus lives, we must learn to love others well. And for me, as I've been processing this and thinking about this and trying to get better in this area of my life, I thought I would just share a few thoughts that I've had as I've been trying to navigate this. And what does it look like, as we get back to that original question, what does it look like for me to open up my life to others? So I just want to take the next few minutes and just share a few real practical thoughts that I have of how this kind of intersects with my life. And the first one is this, is that for me, I try to strategically schedule my time to reflect my values. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, for me, I think all of us in this room, most of us would say, you know what? A value of mine is I want to be someone who's caring, who loves other people. We would say that, like, of course we want to be that. But if it doesn't intersect with our schedule, in other words, if I'm not actually taking time to do that, then guess what? It's not a value of mine. It's just words that I say. And so for me, I say this is a value that I want to have, so I'm going to be strategic to schedule it as part of my life. Here's why. Because I realize that I do not naturally gravitate towards deep friendships. I just don't. Like, if I'm just being honest, I don't accidentally have really great friendships. It just doesn't happen for me. Some of you in the room, maybe for you, it's like, oh, I only have to try. For me, I have to try really hard. I have to be intentional if I'm going to have real, healthy friendships. And so I strategically schedule my time to reflect my values. Say, what does that look like? This is why every single week I prioritize on my calendar small group. Why? Because it matters. It's important. I need those friendships. I need those relationships. It's life-giving. And I know that there's times when it's inconvenient, when I don't feel like it, when I'd much rather just stay home. But because I prioritize it, I say, man, this is a value that I want to have. It's worth it every single time. It looks like me, there's a few guys in my life that man, I take time and we have coffee and we get together on a regular basis. Why? Because I need those relationships. There's some times when it's really inconvenient, when my schedule's really full, but you know what? I still prioritize that because people are important to God, so they're going to be important to me too, and my calendar will reflect that. The next thought that I've been processing is I look for ways to open up my life within the natural rhythms of my life. You say, what are you talking about? Well, if you're normal like me, life is busy sometimes. I get it. There are times when you look at your calendar and you're thinking, I just don't have time. Like, I'm just so busy all the time. And I experience that tension as I'm trying to navigate this. In fact, for me, part of the tension is like, I've got a family, I've got kids, and man, I know I'm supposed to spend time with them, but I'm also supposed to spend time with other people. So how do I do this? And so I began to ask myself, what would it look like to open up my life within the natural rhythms of my life? In other words, what would it look like to bring other people along with what I'm already doing? For example, all of us eat 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. That's 21 meals. What would it look like if maybe a couple of those were with other people? It doesn't cost you more time. It costs you more intentionality, right? Or here's another one. Man, you guys are all here on Sunday. You guys are all in church. What would it look like if you came 15 minutes earlier, or you stayed 15 minutes later, so you weren't just rushing in and rushing out and on to the next thing, but you actually had some margin to connect with people, to have some real conversations, to meet some new people? Or what if you sat in a different spot because you wanted to be intentional, connect with new people? It's how can you connect with others and bring others along within what you're already doing in your life? And finally, the last kind of quick thought that I've been processing and leaning into more and more is that I've really been trying to prioritize FaceTime, okay? Prioritize FaceTime. I'm not talking about the app on your phone that when you accidentally hit the button, it's the most terrifying moment of all time when your camera comes on and you're like, what is going on, right? I'm talking about actually spending time with real people in the same physical place. I know this is like this novel idea, but I realize for me that I'm connected in our digital age with more people than I've ever been connected with my entire life, but yet my relationships are more and more shallow. And I think part of the reason why is with our technology and our social media, I can create this artificial sense of intimacy because I see your posts and I kind of see some snapshots of your life. And so I feel like, oh yeah, I know that person, but really I haven't talked to them in weeks or months. And I'm not saying technology's bad or anything. I love all that stuff, but there's something significant that happens when you spend time with people. Like presence is so powerful. And I'm just learning that more and more. And so I'm trying to fight for FaceTime. I'm trying to fight for presence. So instead of just commenting or shooting a text, man, let's grab dinner. Why don't you come over to the house? Man, hey, let's go play basketball. Let's get coffee. Let's spend time together because that is the stuff of real relationships. And so these are some of the things that I've been processing as I've been trying to learn to love more like Jesus. And this morning, I just want to ask you, what does it look like for you to open up your life to others just a little bit more? What would it look like for you to begin to consider others first? What would it look like for you to actually begin to embrace vulnerability and push past some insecurities and let people into the real you and to get real honest? Man, what would that look like? Because as a church, man, we spend a lot of time thinking about this. One of the things you hear us say around here at Eikon all the time is that, man, everyone is welcome. It's so important that we put it on the wall right when you first walk in, in big print. We said, man, we want to be a place where everyone's welcome because nobody's perfect and anything is possible. What are we saying? We're saying, man, we want to be a church where no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what you haven't done, no matter where you are on the spiritual journey, man, this is a place where you can belong. This is a place where you're welcome. This is a place where we're going to open up our heart and our doors to you. And I think that's amazing. And I believe that with all of my heart that that's who we want to be. But I think what God's been convicting me about more and more lately is we will never truly be a welcoming church until we are welcoming people in our lives. It's easy to talk about this from a church, but guess what? We're the church. It's you. It's me. And if we're not opening up our lives, if we're not welcoming people, if we're not making space for others, we'll never be that as a church. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of a church that truly loves people, that's truly opening up our lives to others, because that's the kind of church where Jesus is moving in our midst, and that's the kind of church that I want to be a part of. And so this week, as we go out, I want to challenge you, man, what would it look like to open up your life just a little bit more so that we could begin to love like Jesus loved? Because when we do that, I truly believe that anything is possible as God moves in our midst. So let's do that this week. Let me pray for you, and we'll move on in service. Father,